Hannibal Barca. Joy of Ball, son of lightning. I mean, just the name itself sounds powerful, doesn't it?
It really does. Conjures up this image of almost mythical force.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into the life, the strategies, the sheer military genius of this Carthaginian commander. We're drawing on historical sources, including the very detailed Wikipedia entry on him.
Yeah, and if you're listening because you want to get a solid grip, quickly but, thoroughly on what made Hannibal one of history's absolute greats, well, you're in the right place.
We're aiming for those aha moments, right? Connecting the dots without getting lost in the weeds.
Precisely. We'll pull out the key insights, the really crucial stuff.
So our mission, basically, is to understand Hannibal's brilliance.
Right.
We'll trace his path, early life, the huge impact of the Second Punic War, right through to his later years, his exile.
It's quite a journey, a huge story.
It really is. So let's jump in.
Okay, foundations first. His father, Hamilcar Barca, he was a big deal himself, wasn't he? A commander in the First Punic War.
Right. So Hannibal grew up steeped in this stuff. Military life, Carthaginian ambitions, it was all around him.
Absolutely. And that name, Barca Lightning, it might not have just been his father's name, but maybe like a family title passed down.
Highlighting that power, that lineage. And he had brothers, too, Hasdrubal and Mago, and sisters who married into other key families. It paints a picture of a well-connected, powerful clan.
Definitely. And after Carthage lost the First Punic War, Hamilcar, well, he knew they had to rebuild. He focused on Iberia, Spain, basically. Resources, manpower, was crucial.
And Hannibal's there, learning the ropes from a young age.
That's the picture we get. Early campaigns alongside his father. Imagine how formative that must have been.
It almost feels like he was being groomed for command. And it wasn't just military, was it? There was politics, too. His marriage, for instance.
Yes, to Imilce, an Iberian princess. That ties into Hasdrubal's strategy, Hasdrubal the Fair, his brother-in-law who took over after Hamilcar, cementing power through local alliances. It was smart.
A long-term game. So, fast forward a bit to 221 BCE, Hasdrubal is assassinated.
And the army turns to Hannibal. The sources, like Livy, say the soldiers were incredibly enthusiastic. It was like they saw the young Hamilcar reborn.
Well, that's quite the endorsement. Speaks volumes about his father's legacy and Hannibal's own early impression.
No doubt. So he takes command and spends the next couple of years consolidating power in Hispania, pushing Carthaginian influence right up to the Ebro River.
So, building his base, securing the territory, he wasn't just rushing into conflict then.
Not immediately. But then there's Saguntum, a city south of the Ebro, but allied with Rome.
Okay. And Hannibal saw this Roman alliance as, what, a breach of agreement?
Exactly. A violation of the treaty Hasdrubal had made regarding spheres of influence. He saw it as Roman meddling.
And his response?
He besieged Saguntum, which, predictably, provoked Rome. They demanded Carthage hand him over.
But Carthage didn't. Why not? Popularity? Or did they agree with Hannibal?
Probably a mix of both. Maybe they felt Rome had overstepped. Maybe they couldn't control the popular general anyway. Whatever reason, by the end of that year, war was inevitable. And Hannibal's sights were set on Italy.
Which brings us to maybe the most famous part of his story, the overland journey to Italy. Second Punic War, 218 BCE.
Just utterly audacious. Crossing the Pyrenees, then the Alps. With war elephants, it's the stuff of legend.
Had anyone even conceived of that before? I know Hasdrubal, his brother-in-law, had maybe scouted some routes.
Some initial thoughts, perhaps, but the scale of what Hannibal undertook was unprecedented. The Romans knew something might be coming. They'd had dealings with Gauls in the Po Valley.
But they couldn't have imagined this.
Yeah.
Marching an army over the Alps.
Unlikely. So he sets off from New Carthage, Cartagena today, late spring 218 BCE. And right away, he's fighting northern tribes just to get to the Pyrenees.
Shows his tactical thinking early on, using surprise. He had to leave troops behind too, right?
Yeah.
To secure the land.
Yeah. And some troops apparently weren't keen on the whole Alps adventure either, so he let them go home. Smart move, kept morale up for those who stayed.
The numbers, though, what are we talking initially?
Sources estimate maybe 40,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry. Huge numbers to move and supply.
And the obstacles. Mountains, rivers, hostile tribes. It's relentless.
Absolutely. He fought his way through parts of Gaul. By the time he reached the Rhone River, maybe December-ish, his numbers were down. Around 38,000 foot soldiers, 8,000 horsemen, and 37 elephants.
Still a massive force. And crossing the Rhone wasn't easy either, was it? Weren't the Romans nearby?
They were. A Roman force under Scipio the Father again tried to intercept him. But Hannibal cleverly moved upstream, crossed quickly, and evaded them. Brilliant maneuvering.
And then the Alps.
Yeah. Livy's account paints this picture of just incredible hardship, treacherous paths, bad weather, ambushes by local tribes.
And that story about using vinegar and fire to break rocks, is that likely true?
Probably more legend than fact, that specific detail. But the core truth is undeniable. It was brutal. Polybius gives a stark figure for who actually made it into Italy.
What was it?
Maybe 20,000 infantry and only 4,000 cavalry, plus a few elephants. The losses were staggering, just immense.
But he'd done it. He was in Italy, on Rome's doorstep, effectively.
He opened that northern front, and his goal wasn't, a direct siege of Rome itself, not initially. He didn't have the equipment or maybe the numbers for that.
So what was the plan?
Undermine Rome's power base, break its alliances, get the Italian city-states, Rome's allies, to defect, turn them against Rome. It was a sophisticated pan-Mediterranean strategy, probably influenced by his Greek tutors.
Right, hit Rome where it hurts its network of support.
Exactly, and this leads straight into a string of Roman disasters. First up, Trebia, 218 BCE.
Okay, so Hannibal's in the Po Valley. He's managed to get some Gaulish tribes to switch sides, right? Causing trouble for the Romans.
He did. Big rebellions flared up, so Rome sends Publius Cornelius Scipio the father to deal with it. Remember, they hadn't expected Hannibal over the Alps so soon.
They thought the fight would be in Iberia.
Right. There's an initial cavalry clash at the Ticinus River. Hannibal's Numidian cavalry proves superior. The Romans retreat. Scipio himself gets wounded. His son, the future Africanus, supposedly saves him.
Then the other Roman consul arrives, Sempronius Longus.
Yes, and Sempronius is spoiling for a fight. Hannibal positions himself cleverly, even captures a Roman supply depot at Clastidium vital for his army.
And then the main battle at the Trebia River. December. Cold.
Freezing. Hannibal plays it perfectly. He lures the Romans across the icy river before they've even had breakfast. They're cold, hungry, tired.
And he had a trick up his sleeve.
A classic Hannibal move. He'd hidden troops under his brother Mago in a ravine. At the critical moment, they hit the Roman rear. Combined with the cold and the pressure from the front, the Roman army just disintegrated. A total rout.
Masterclass in tactics. What about the next year, 217?
Another huge Roman defeat, Lake Trasimene. Hannibal had wintered with the Gauls, then decided to move south, looking for a better base.
And the Romans try to block him. New consuls.
Cneius Servilius Geminus and Gaius Flaminius, they position their armies to try and contain him. But Hannibal does something unexpected.
What's that?
He takes his army through the Arno marshes. A treacherous, difficult route, very costly, lost a lot of men, maybe most of the remaining elephants is possibly here, or crossing the Apennines right after, that he gets that eye infection, loses sight in one eye.
Incredible hardship. But he gets through into Etruria.
Yes, and now his target is Flaminius.
Yeah.
He knows Flaminius is impulsive, under pressure from Rome to act. So Hannibal starts deliberately devastating the land Flaminius is supposed to protect.
Trying to bait him into battle.
Exactly, and Flaminius takes the bait. He pursues Hannibal recklessly.
Straight into another trap.
A massive ambush. Hannibal hides his forces in the hills overlooking the narrow road along Lake Trasimene. As the Roman column marches in, strung out, Hannibal springs the trap. Foggy morning, apparently, adding to the confusion.
Annihilation.
Pretty much the entire Roman army pinned against the lake, slaughtered. Flaminius himself is killed. Until Carrhae, centuries later, it was probably the worst ambush Rome ever suffered.
Just devastating. But still, Hannibal doesn't march on Rome.
No. He recognized he lacked siege engines, the logistical support for a long siege. His strategy shifted fully to winning over allies. That's when he reportedly says, I haven't come to fight Italians, but on behalf of Italians against Rome, trying to break that federation.
So Rome's response, they must have been panicking.
They appoint a dictator, Fabius Maximus, and he brings in a whole new approach.
It's a Fabian strategy, right? Avoid direct battle.
Exactly. Attrition. Shadow Hannibal, harass his foraging parties, cut off supplies, wear him down slowly. Avoid pitched battles where Hannibal's genius could shine.
Is that popular in Rome? Sounds cautious.
Not at all. Many Romans thought it was cowardly, un-Roman. They called him cunctator, the delayer. But looking back, it was probably the smartest thing they could do at that point.
Did Hannibal manage to break free sometimes? I remember a story about oxen.
Ah, yes. Fabius had him trapped in Campania, blocked the passes. Hannibal's move was brilliant, tied torches to the horns of oxen at night, drove them up a hill. The Romans thought Hannibal's army was escaping that way and moved to intercept, leaving the main pass open for Hannibal's actual army to slip through.
Genius.
Incredible. But the pressure builds in Rome for a decisive battle, which leads us to
Cannae. 216 BCE, arguably Hannibal's greatest victory and one of history's most studied battles.
What sets it up?
Hannibal seizes the massive Roman supply depot at Cannae, in Apulia, southern Italy, puts himself right between the Romans and their supplies, forces their hand.
And the Romans respond.
By raising the biggest army they'd ever fielded? Estimates vary, but maybe 60,000, even up to 80,000 men. Two new consuls, Varro and Paulus, they marched south, determined to crush Hannibal with sheer numbers. Varro was the more aggressive one, wasn't he? Took command on the day of the battle.
He was. And Hannibal was ready. He deployed his forces near the Aufidus River. His formation was key.
The crescent shape.
Right. Seemingly weak in the center, his Gallic and Spanish infantry, stronger, veteran Libyan infantry on the flanks, angled slightly back, and his superior cavalry, Numidian and Gallic, on the wings.
So the Romans charged straight at the seemingly weak center.
Just as Hannibal planned. They pushed deeper and deeper, thinking they were breaking through, but the Carthaginian center just bent backwards. It didn't break.
While the flanks held.
Exactly. The Libyan infantry held firm, gradually swinging inwards, enveloping the Romans pushing into the pocket. And meanwhile,
The cavalry.
Hannibal's cavalry smashed the Roman cavalry on both wings. Then, crucially, instead of pursuing them off the field, they regrouped and circled around to attack the packed Roman infantry from behind.
Complete encirclement.
Total. The Roman legions were trapped, densely packed, unable to maneuver, attacked from all sides. It was pure carnage.
The losses. They're astronomical, aren't they?
Staggering. 50,000, maybe 70,000 Romans killed or captured. Consul Paulus died, along with scores of senators, former consuls, officers. Rome's worst single-day defeat ever. One of the bloodiest battles in all history.
Utterly devastating. So, after that, surely Hannibal marches on Rome.
He didn't, and historians still debate why. Lack of siege gear. Not enough men for an assault and holding his gains. Lack of clear support or orders from Carthage. We don't know for sure.
And that famous quote from Hannibal, his cavalry commander.
Hannibal, you know how to win a victory, but not how to use it. Whether it was truly said then or not, it captures the frustration some must have felt.
But Carthage did have huge consequences, right? Allies defecting.
Oh, absolutely. Major cities in southern Italy, like Capua, Tarentum briefly, went over to Hannibal. Syracuse and Sicily allied with Carthage. Philip V of Macedon made an alliance. It looked like Rome was finally crumbling.
But it didn't crumble.
Yeah.
What happened next? A stalemate.
Pretty much, yeah. Rome, despite the horrific losses, had incredible resilience, deep reserves of manpower. They largely went back to the Fabian strategy. Avoid big battles, focus on smaller engagements, reconquering lost territory piece by piece, wearing Hannibal down.
So Hannibal kept winning battles, but maybe not war-changing ones.
He still won tactical victories, yeah. Destroyed a couple of Roman armies in 212, killed 2 consuls, including Marcellus in 208. But he was struggling. Support from Carthage was, well, limited.
Why? Weren't they thrilled with his success?
You'd think so. But the ruling oligarchy back home was divided. There was the Barca faction supporting Hannibal, but also a powerful peace faction led by Hanno the Great. Plus, they were increasingly focused on defending their interests in Iberia, where the Romans were also fighting.
So Hannibal's pleading for reinforcements, and they're just not fully committed.
Seems that way. They controlled the purse strings, the resources, and maybe they were wary of Hannibal becoming too powerful. It's complex, but the bottom line is he wasn't getting the consistent support he needed for that knockout blow.
And slowly, the tide turns.
Slowly but surely. Romans retake Capua in 211. Syracuse falls. They defeat a Carthaginian relief army in Sicily. They ally with the Aetolian League in Greece to keep Philip busy.
So Hannibal's allies are being neutralized.
Exactly. Hannibal wins at Herdonia in 210, Locri in 208, showing he's still dangerous tactically. But he loses Tarentum in 209. Then comes the really big blow.
Hasdrubal, his brother.
Yes. Hasdrubal finally manages to cross the Alps and bring an army into Italy in 207, hoping to link up with Hannibal.
The reinforcement Hannibal desperately needed.
But the Romans intercepted his messages, knew his plans, and moved decisively. They met Hasdrubal at the Metaurus River and crushed his army. Hasdrubal himself was killed.
And the story about his head.
Yeah, grim stuff. The Romans apparently threw Hasdrubal's severed head into Hannibal's camp, a brutal message. Your last real hope is gone.
Devastating. And his other brother, Mago, wasn't having much luck either.
No, Mago was fighting in Liguria, northern Italy, but facing setbacks too. The situation was becoming untenable for Hannibal in Italy.
And meanwhile, things are changing in Africa. Scipio,
Scipio Africanus, the son who saved his father at Ticinus, had been very successful in Spain, driving the Carthaginians out. Then he persuaded Rome to let him invade North Africa directly, threaten Carthage itself.
Forcing Carthage's hand.
Exactly. With Scipio wreaking havoc in Africa, the Carthaginian government finally recalled Hannibal, 203 BCE, after 15 years in Italy.
15 years undefeated in major battles on Italian soil. Incredible. Did he leave any record?
They say he left a bronze inscription at a temple in Crotona, detailing his achievements. His return definitely boosted morale in Carthage, the war party got the upper hand, and he was put in command of their main army.
So the final showdown is set. Hannibal versus Scipio. But first, peace talks.
They tried. Hannibal and Scipio met, but talks broke down. Roman accusations of bad faith segunt him again, and Carthage had also recently seized a stranded Roman fleet carrying supplies, which really angered the Romans.
It seems like a mistake by Carthage, seizing the fleet.
A huge blunder, yeah. Scipio had apparently offered relatively mild terms, but maybe Hannibal's return made them overconfident. Anyway, they rejected the terms. So it came down to battle. Zama, 202 BCE.
And this time, the tables were turned in one key area.
Cavalry. Critically, Scipio had won over Massinissa, the king of the Numidians, so Rome now had the superior Numidian cavalry that had served Hannibal so well for years.
Ouch. Hannibal still had elephants, though.
About 80. And maybe slightly more infantry, but his veterans were weary, mixed with raw recruits. Scipio's army was battle-hardened from Spain and Africa.
How did the battle play out?
The Roman Numidian cavalry quickly routed the Carthaginian cavalry on the wings. Scipio had also figured out tactics for the elephants blowing trumpets to scare them, leaving lanes open in his formation for them to charge through harmlessly.
Clever. So the elephants weren't decisive.
Caused some disruption, but mostly neutralized. Then the infantry lines clashed. It was a tough, grinding fight. Hannibal's veterans in the third line fought fiercely.
But the difference maker?
The returning Roman and Numidian cavalry, just like Hannibal did at Cannae, Scipio's cavalry slammed into the Carthaginian rear. That broke them. Total collapse.
And the losses.
Heavy for Carthage. Maybe 20,000 killed, 15,000 captured or wounded. Roman losses were comparatively light, maybe 1,500. Zama was the end of the war, and Hannibal's first and only major battlefield defeat.
The end of an era. But not quite the end of Hannibal's story. He actually became a politician.
Surprisingly, yes. Back in Carthage, after the peace treaty, he gets elected as Suffet chief magistrate. And he actually tries to reform things.
Really? How?
Tackled corruption, tried to make the ruling council more accountable with term limits, managed the huge war indemnity payments to Rome without crippling new taxes. He was apparently quite effective.
But that probably didn't make him popular with everyone.
Definitely not with the old oligarchy he was challenging. They resented his power, his reforms, and Rome was always suspicious, always watching him.
So Rome eventually demands his surrender, even years later.
About 7 years after Zama, yes. They demanded Carthage hand him over.
And rather than face that,
he chose exile, slipped away, went first to Tyre, Carthage's mother city, then ended up in the east at the court of King Antiochus III of Syria.
And Antiochus was gearing up to fight Rome.
He was. Hannibal saw Antiochus's army, though, and wasn't impressed. Told him it wasn't good enough to beat the Romans, advised him to build a navy, invade Italy, even offered to lead the campaign himself.
Did Antiochus listen?
Not really. Listened more to his flatterers. Didn't give Hannibal a major command.
There's some great stories from that time, aren't there? About his wit, the philosopher.
Ah, Formio. Yes, Hannibal sits through this philosopher lecturing endlessly about generalship. Asked his opinion, Hannibal supposedly says he's known many old fools, but Formio topped them all.
Huh. And the one about Antiochus showing off his army.
Right. Antiochus displays his massive glittering army and asks Hannibal, "Is this enough for the Romans?" And Hannibal's dry reply, "Oh yes, quite enough for the Romans, greedy as they are." Basically saying they'll make great spoils for the Romans. Sarcastic, but brutally honest.
And he was right, wasn't he? Antiochus lost badly.
Decisively. At Thermopylae, then Magnesia, Rome crushed him. Hannibal even briefly commanded a fleet for Antiochus, but was defeated at sea too.
So Hannibal's on the run again? Where next?
He fled, ended up briefly in Armenia, supposedly helped design their new capital, Artaxata, then maybe Crete. Eventually finds refuge with King Prusias, the Circe of Bithynia, another kingdom in modern-day Turkey.
And Prusias was fighting Rome's ally, Eumenes of Pergamon.
He was. So Hannibal served Prusias, won some land battles, and even won a naval victory using, well, a unique tactic.
Go snakes.
Yep. Pots filled with venomous snakes catapulted onto the enemy ships caused absolute chaos, pure Hannibal ingenuity, even in naval warfare.
But Rome's reach is long.
Inescapable. They pressured Prussians, demanded he hand Hannibal over, and Prussians, fearing Rome, eventually agreed.
So Hannibal is cornered.
Finally, at Labissa, rather than be captured, paraded through Rome, he took poison, said to have carried it in a ring for years just for this eventuality.
His last words.
Something like wanting to relieve the Romans of their long anxiety, waiting for an old man's death, defiant to the end.
What year was that exactly? Is it certain?
There's some debate. 183, 182, maybe 181 BCE. But the end point is the same. An extraordinary life comes to a close.
And his legacy, I mean, it's immense.
Undeniable, one of history's absolute greatest military minds. Theodore Dodge called him the father of strategy. High praise.
And later generals looked up to him. Napoleon, Wellington.
Absolutely. Studied his campaigns, admired his genius, his ability to lead diverse troops, overcome incredible odds. His tactics, especially Cannae, are still studied in military academies today.
His life story, too, it's just so dramatic. No wonder it inspires films and books. And that quote,
"We will either find a way or make one," perfectly sums up his relentless determination, doesn't it?
it really does. So wrapping up this deep dive, we've seen these incredibly bold strategies, that amazing undefeated run in Italy, and just sheer mastery of tactics.
Yeah, consistently outthinking, outfighting the Romans for 15 years, adapting to different terrains, different opponents. It's remarkable.
And for you listening, those aha moments might be grasping the sheer scale of the Alps crossing, the tactical brilliance of Cannae, or just realizing how long he held out against such a powerhouse.
It's a story full of surprises, really, how one individual could pose such a profound threat to Rome for so long.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe. Despite all those battlefield victories in Italy, Hannibal ultimately didn't achieve his main goal. Carthage lost the war.
It's a crucial point. What does that tell us? About the limits of military genius, maybe? Without that solid political backing, that consistent logistical support, even the best general can't do it all alone.
Are there parallels today, do you think? Something to ponder. We definitely encourage you to keep exploring the Punic Wars, Hannibal's impact. It's an endlessly fascinating period of history.